Sirui Anamorphic Lenses lineup just made the market go wild, and I've worked with every single lens from this lineup and even reviewed all of them. That is why right now we're going to have a look at 10 anamorphic Sirui lenses, 4 crop camera lenses with squeeze factor of 1.33x, 5 full-frame lenses with squeeze factor of 1.6x, and a brand new Sirui 135mm t2.9 with a squeeze factor of 1.8x. In today's video we're going to find out what results you'll be able to achieve with those lenses, what are the nuances of work with those, which lens to pick first, and which couple of lenses to pick for a perfect kit, both for full-frame cameras and for crop sensor cameras. Let's go! Why do you know that one image looks really cinematic and the other one is looking like plastic? Because from the very childhood you've been watching CinemaScope, widescreen movies with long blue streaks and oval bokeh, because most of those movies were shot on anamorphic optics. And subconsciously we associate those anamorphic characteristics, such as strong distortion, soft image and pretty strong vignette, with real, beautiful movie. In this video I will not tell you why anamorphic optics even exists and why it gained such popularity, it's a topic of a different video. But today guys we are going to be talking about the budget full-frame anamorphic lenses from Sirui and APS-C lenses as well. And yeah guys, the name of the company is Sirui. I know that you want to call it Sirui, but our Chinese partners did call it in this way. Sirui is the right one.
I know it's Sirui when you spell it, but in reality it's Sirui, and it actually means sage or wise person. So when you buy a Sirui, you are a wise person.
Throughout this year I was able to test all of the full-frame Sirui lenses, Sirui Venus 35, 50, 75, 100mm and 135mm, and also Sirui Saturn 35mm, which is exactly the same lens as the 35 Venus, but it's 2 times smaller and lighter and uses carbon fiber in its construction. They all have the same aperture of t2.9 and the anamorphic squeeze ratio of 1.6x, except for 135mm lens, which has 1.8x squeeze ratio for some reason. And it means that horizontally you'll be getting 1.6 times more information after you de-squeeze the image. All of those lenses are available for such systems as Sony E, Nikon Z, Canon RF and L-mount. I've been testing those lenses with my Sony a7S III camera, which has 16:9 sensor when you shoot video, and considering the squeeze ratio we do get a pretty narrow field of view and the aspect ratio of 2.8 to 1. But if you'll be using a camera with a sensor that is 3:2 in video mode, for instance Panasonic S1 or S1H, you'll be getting a more classic CinemaScope look with the aspect ratio of 2.4 to 1. In my opinion it's not a big problem, you can scale and crop the image in post and you'll get whatever look and aspect ratio you want. So now let's talk about all of those full-frame lenses in particular, why you need those, which lens does what, and which will be perfect for your particular needs. So let's start off with the Sirui Venus 35mm t2.9 1.6x anamorphic, and also let's add in the Sirui Saturn 35mm because those two lenses are basically identical optically, and the only difference is that the Saturn is 2 times smaller and lighter, as I said before, and also it comes in 2 different flare options, the classic blue ones and also the neutral flares, which look pretty interesting in my opinion. So 35mm is the widest angle you'll ever get in this lineup. Horizontally, after this squeeze, it'll give you around 22mm focal length, and of course vertically it stays at 35mm. That is why you'll be getting a very wide shot and you need to be careful with your composition so your scene doesn't look empty. Sirui 35mm t2.9 1.6x lens is a perfect lens for mini documentaries, shooting handheld, as I shot with my friend Igor Hlebnikov, you can see the shots from this video right here, and also it was more than good for shooting a music video and a couple of shots from St. Petersburg during springtime. And also this lens is the most lightweight and compact among all the lineup of full-frame lenses, especially the Saturn lens, which I love for its size. The bigger Venus lens is almost 1 kilogram in weight, but it's not as heavy as the other lenses from this full-frame lineup. It is very hard to get oval bokeh with this lens and hard to get background separation because of the t2.9 aperture and a pretty wide shot. But instead you'll be getting a pretty nice blue flare from the sun or other bright sources of light. This lens has a very specific distortion, and it's a pincushion distortion instead of barrel distortion that you see in most anamorphic lenses that are wide angle. But I do enjoy this kind of distortion, it adds a lot of character to your shot, and you can try to fix the pincushion distortion into barrel distortion in post, but you'll have to work hard. Unfortunately, the minimal focusing distance is only 90 centimeters, that is why it's very hard to get a close-up shot, and you'll need to have a set of diopters with the Sirui 35mm t2.9. Diopters is basically a magnifying glass for your lens, and you'll be able to get a set of 4 different diopters with different strength for like $30. I'll leave a link to this set down below, and you can use those diopters with different lenses because they have 82mm filter thread. To conclude, Sirui 35mm t2.9 1.6x Anamorphic gives you a very unique perspective, a lot of room in your shot, and it's a great choice for creative decisions. To be completely honest, that's the favorite lens among the whole lineup, and I use this lens more often than the other lenses. The next lens is Sirui 50mm t2.9 1.6x Anamorphic. That's the very first full-frame anamorphic lens from Sirui, and I did enjoy using it in Grodno, Belarus. In my opinion, that's the golden standard in terms of focal length, and dozens of my friends and colleagues do use this particular lens all around the world. The 50mm full-frame anamorphic lens is an obvious choice if you want to buy only one lens from this lineup. Of course, it's big, it's heavy, but it works in so many different scenarios. In my opinion, this lens almost doesn't have any flaws, and I do recommend starting to get acquainted with the world of anamorphic optics with this 50mm lens. But remember guys, that the squeeze ratio of the Sirui 50mm t2.9 is not constant. On the infinity it is 1.6x, but when you get to the minimum focusing distance it's more like 1.52x, and unfortunately the whole lineup except for the 35mm Venus and Saturn do struggle with this problem. That is why on close-ups the faces might look a little too stretched and also too fat, so be careful with that. Horizontally you'll get around 32mm full frame equivalent, and vertically 50mm of course. The next lens is Sirui 75mm t2.9 1.6x Anamorphic. I have some really good memories about shooting with this lens because I shot 3 perfectly greatly looking weddings in Paris with this lens. And let me say that you get a lot of compression with this lens, and your horizontal field of view is around 47mm, and it allowed me to make all of the shots look pretty unnatural and cinematic at the same time. And also I was able to get a really nice background separation and some oval bokehs as well. It was a real challenge to shoot only with this lens, especially handheld, but I do like the result. The size and weight of Sirui 75mm t2.9 full-frame anamorphic is much bigger than the previous lenses we've discussed. And shooting handheld with this lens is a tough choice, so you'd better use a tripod or a gimbal. But instead you do get a really nice image quality which stands out from the spherical lenses. The lens flares are still a bit muted and not as sharp as in the crop sensor Sirui lenses. And also the sharpness of this lens is pretty nice from corner to corner. The minimum focusing distance is also pretty great, and I was able to get some close-up shots without even using the diopters, and also it has a really short focus throw which was really handy to shoot handheld without a follow focus system. Just look at the beauty of Paris through this lens. I'll leave a link down below to some shots and some wedding videos shot with this Sirui 75mm anamorphic lens you'll enjoy. Behemoth, bazooka and bokeh monster. I'm talking about Sirui 100mm t2.9 1.6x anamorphic. If you'll be able to cope with the size and weight of this lens, you'll be more than happy. The compression of the image combined with the t2.9 aperture is giving you a great background separation and some oval bokehs as well. And from time to time the lens flares are kinda dancing with each other. Love the flaring from this lens. Sirui 100mm t2.9 1.6x was a perfect companion to Sirui 35mm while shooting a mini documentary about a dancer. And great minimum focusing distance was giving me the chances to shoot without diopters, and I got some pretty good close-up shots. And don't forget that this lens has a lot of character. The main disadvantages of this lens for me is the size and weight of this lens. Even for DJI RS2 or RS3, it will be very tough choice and tough time with this lens. But if you're not afraid of big and heavy optics, you'll love it. Sirui 135mm t2.9 1.8x Anamorphic. That's one more behemoth of a lens in terms of size and weight. And for some reason it does have 1.8x squeeze ratio, which makes images from 16:9 camera sensors look really thin. And you'll be getting a focal length horizontally about 75mm and same 135mm vertically. I think it's more suitable to shoot with Panasonic S1H with this lens, with the open gate mode and 3x2 image sensor. But still, this lens does give you pretty nice oval bokeh. It has great minimal focus and distance, nice sharpness, compression and background separation, but still the same disadvantages in terms of size and weight. And also guys, I found this lens to be very greenish. I had to move my white balance point towards magenta by 2 steps. That's an interesting anamorphic lens, but I didn't fall in love with it, to be honest. And a different squeeze factor of this lens makes it hard to mix and match it with other lenses from this lineup. Well, we've already talked about which lens to pick if you were to pick only one lens. It's a 50mm lens, of course, and some people would say just get the whole kit, the whole lineup from 35 to 135. But to be honest guys, these lenses are not cheap, and I have 2 kits as a suggestion. The first kit of 2 lenses is Sirui 35mm, especially the Sirui Saturn version, because it's so lightweight and it has really nice distortion and extremely wide angle. I love something about this lens, it's magical. And as an addition, I would pick the Sirui 75mm t2.9 1.6x anamorphic because it does give you some portrait focal length, it has compression, it has oval bokeh, and combined with a 35mm lens, we have 2 very nice focal length for different scenes and scenarios. Also, this kit of 35 and 75mm lenses will be relatively compact and lightweight. But if 35mm is too wide for you and you don't care about the size and weight of your optics, I would say 50mm and 100mm lenses is also a great kit. To conclude, full frame anamorphic lenses from Sirui will kinda open a door into the cinematic world, or into movies world, let me say. And considering the fact that they are maybe 10 or even 100 times more cheap than the professional cinema anamorphic lenses, you'll be able to achieve some great results with a relatively low budget. But remember guys, not the camera and even not the lens is giving you beautiful cinematic image. It's all about color, lighting, composition, storytelling, camera movement, and dozens of other nuances, so you'll be able to grab the attention of your viewer and to seize it and hold it. I was really impressed by those full-frame anamorphic lenses by Sirui, and I'm sure that you'll be able to achieve some awesome results with those lenses if you do use them correctly. And creatively, of course. So now let's talk about more budget lineup for APS-C and Micro Four Thirds cameras. So here we have 4 different lenses, 24, 35, 50 and 75mm. So Sirui 24mm f2.8, yeah guys, you've heard that. Full-frame lenses had T-stops, whereas the crop lenses have f-stops. The T-stop is an actual amount of light that hits your camera, whereas the f-stop is a relative number, so keep that in mind as well. It has 1.33x squeeze ratio, which gives you 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio on a 16:9 camera sensor. And it's a pretty common filmic aspect ratio. No matter that it's an APS-C camera lens, it's still a pretty big lens, 800 grams. And let's not forget guys that it's only f2.8 and the full frame equivalent focal length horizontally is around 27mm, and the minimum focusing distance is huge, 60 centimeters, so don't expect this lens to have some awesome out of focus backgrounds. It's not about it. It's still a good lens and it has some purposes, but personally, I don't really like the lens flares. They are thin, too vibrant, too saturated and too strong, and they are throughout the whole screen, the whole image. So I would not consider this lens seriously because of the lens flares in the first place. The next on the list is the Sirui 35mm f1.8 1.33x. It's also a pretty big lens, but now we have a very fast lens of f1.8 and the background separation is much more visible. Plus we get a 40mm full frame equivalent focal length horizontally. And it's a perfect focal length for both some wide shots and for some close-up shots as well. But unfortunately the minimum focus and distance is huge, 85 centimeters, and you'll definitely need to bring diopters with you. By the way, all the APS-C Sirui Anamorphic lenses have the same issue with not constant squeeze ratio. At infinity, all 4 APS-C lenses do have 1.33x squeeze ratio, but on the minimum focusing distance it can drop down to 1.25x. Also, this crop sensor lineup has some issues with color reproduction because from time to time when you mix and match those lenses, you can change your Kelvins for 400 or 500 points, which is not ideal. And also you'll need to adjust your green magenta shift as well. And to be honest guys, those lenses are really warm and a bit greenish. The lens flares on the 35mm f1.8 are much nicer than on the 24mm, but still they're a bit too saturated, and from time to time you do get double flaring, and it's a bit overwhelming. But all in all, I do love the image quality that you get with this lens. If you want to start out with anamorphic lenses on a crop sensor camera, you'd better start with this 35mm lens. By the way, I did use all of those crop sensor anamorphic lenses with Sony a7S III, a full-frame camera in 4K, and I was using the clear image zoom and just zooming in 1.5 times. That's the life hack I had. The 50mm f1.8 1.33x is giving you pretty oval and pretty big bokeh. It's a very nice lens to make some portraits with, and also it's relatively compact and lightweight, being only 560 grams. In terms of color, it's very warm and also pretty greenish. Setting white balance with this lens is a tough challenge. I would suggest carrying a gray card with you when you use this lens. But also it's pretty affordable, and we have a ton of options for those lenses on secondhand market. I would put it on the third place in my rating of those APS-C lenses from Sirui. The first place will be of course the 35mm, and the second is the Sirui 75mm f1.8 1.33x. Is not lightweight and not small by any means, but still it does give you a lot of oval bokeh, good compression. It's a fast lens at f1.8 by the way, and the lens flares are much more pleasing than on the crop 50mm for instance. But unfortunately the minimum focus and distance of 1.2 meters is pretty disappointing. Diopters, they will help you. It's a good lens, and I did get some awesome shots with this lens, and I think that the combination of a 35 f1.8 and this 75 f1.8 is a really good kit if you're going to shoot anamorphic with a crop sensor camera. By the way, I forgot to mention that you will be able to use IBIS with your anamorphic lenses. So you have to set your IBIS manually, and you'll need to set an equivalent horizontal focal length. For instance, let's take a full-frame 35mm lens. You'll need to set your IBIS to 22mm, and if you'll be using a 100mm lens, you have to divide it by 1.6x, so the squeeze ratio, and we'll be getting 62.5mm, and just set the closest number in your IBIS settings. With this method, you'll be able to count your perfect IBIS settings for any anamorphic lens. Just divide its focal length by the squeeze factor. The built-in image stabilization on Sony is not doing great with anamorphic lenses, but still it's better than with the IBIS turned off, for sure. But on Panasonic cameras, you do have a special dedicated anamorphic stabilization mode. Well guys, that's the guide for Sirui anamorphic lenses from me. You can find big in-depth reviews of those lenses on my channel there in the playlist called Anamorphic Lenses. Thank you very much for watching, and if you did enjoy this video, please smash the like and subscribe buttons as I say my videos, and hit the notifications bell. See you in the next video guys. Take care, bye.